to my podcast, Fixing America with J. Mel. This podcast proposes that we convene the First Continental Congress of the 21st century. This Congress is called in response to Trump's Big Ugly Enabling Act that funds his Gestapo, feeds his oligarchy, and builds his wall of subversion. It is also in response to having a convicted felon as president who incited an insurrection, pardoned the violent participants in it, and has blatantly attempted to undermine freedom of speech, due process, the independence of the judiciary, and our alliances with other democracies. It is to protect our democracy from the current administration's undermining the rule of law, eroding checks and balances, encouraging violence and unrest, questioning the integrity of elections, marginalizing certain communities, weakening international cooperation, and aligning with dictatorships. For those who do not believe the foregoing things are happening, I invite you to come to my show. No tricks. I will ask you open-ended questions and listen to your answers with an open mind. Please send me your contact information at jamesmmorris@me.com. That is jamesmmorris@me.com. Let me take this opportunity to say that I am not a MAGA fan. I am sad to admit that I do have friends and relatives who are infected with that mindset, and I disagree with most of it. But they have one important thing right. Our government was and is broken and needs fixing, and our political system has failed to fix it. We, in the non-MAGA group, made a big mistake not recognizing those facts and acknowledging that we have that in common. We should have tried harder to find common ground and work together toward finding and fixing the problems. For these reasons, I value the input of all citizens who want to participate in good faith in our First Continental Congress of the 21st century. For the rest of the universe, including those of us who believe our government is broken, this podcast will begin with a hypothesis I developed in my tiny little brain. My hypothesis is the balance between politics and governance in our democracy is out of whack. I arrived at this hypothesis through the following analysis. First, the politics of governance, that is, the process of gaining and maintaining power, has become so overpowering, divisive, and corrosive that it has effectively sterilized the substantive and procedural governance function, leaving our democracy vulnerable to destruction from within. Second, effective governance depends on political legitimacy, which must be informed by evidence and public interest. Governance must be shielded from excessive politicization. Excessive politicization detracts from citizen enlightenment, an element essential for self-governance. 3. An enlightened citizenry is essential because it enables substantive governance, and substantive governance fosters enlightened citizenship. Those two things, enlightened citizenry and substantive governance, work together and are synergetic. 4. When politics and substantive governance are misaligned or there is insufficient guidance from an enlightened citizenry, the combined effect can lead to inefficiency, mistrust, or authoritarianism. And last, our failure to develop, nurture, and maintain An enlightened citizenry is a root cause of the failure of our democracy. I am a disgruntled Democrat who has argued to no avail that we, the people, must change the way we do politics, that the traditional role of politics must be subordinated to citizen involvement in substantive and procedural governance. What does that mean? Well, to me, it means that we must focus more on understanding the social issues and their solutions than on how and who to put and keep in power. In other words, we need to teach our citizens how to collectively find real solutions to problems rather than the politics of solving them. Politics is about gaining and keeping power, and power corrupts. Governance is about solving problems. It does not corrupt. Unfortunately, both are necessary. The politics side must be restrained. The governance side must be unrestrained. An imbalance between the two produces problems. Now, I hear what you're saying. You can't get what you want done in Congress unless you focus on the politics and elect the right person to vote your interests. And of course, there is some truth to that. But my response is, well, how well has that worked for you so far? If you really want to solve the problem in a democracy, you must establish the proper educational base to create an enlightened citizenry. Let me give you an example. I know a guy who is a retired veterinarian. He had a highly successful veterinary practice and holds a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine degree from a highly respected university. I asked him a political question, and he said he did not want to talk about it. I said, why? And he said, well, it would just cause friction between us. And I asked, why? Because I do not like the way Trump is running the country? He said, at least he is trying to run it like a business. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not the response of an enlightened citizen. Businesses exist to make a profit. Most are encased in a legal fiction, like a corporation, which, by law, does not have a conscience. Governments exist for the good of the people, to do collectively what individuals cannot accomplish separately. That will be a topic for one or more discussions of this podcast. This individual is highly educated, so being enlightened must mean more than having letters behind your name. We will strive to understand what enlightened means and why it is essential to a sustained democracy. Enlightened citizens are well informed, value democratic principles, understand basic tenets of a democracy, accept the responsibility towards governance, and will demand accountability and transparency of their leaders. They will be more receptive to civil education, more likely to think critically, and less susceptible to populism, disinformation, and corruption. It starts with the adoption of the tenet that public education is an essential foundation for a sustainable democracy. And that will be a major topic of discussion. The solution to the political part of the problem is not difficult to articulate. I think it can be solved with campaign finance reform, term limits, and transparency. What and how to do that will require some work. At the beginning of this podcast, I mentioned several things that necessitated the convening of the First Continental Congress of the 21st century. And shortly thereafter, I also mentioned that I am not a MAGA fan, but I agree with their claim that our government was broken and that I valued hearing their perspective. Those things may seem contradictory, but let me explain. Many of the things I listed that I disagree with are breaches of basic democratic tenets. These are the principles that our forefathers skillfully wrote into the Constitution of the United States of America that are inviolate. Things such as freedom of speech, assembly, and press, freedom of religion, separation of church and state, due process, writ of habeas corpus, independent judiciary, 3 independent branches of governance, and the right to vote. When the president, a political party, or anyone else attempts to destroy or suppress the availability of or application of any basic tenet of our Constitution unlawfully and without going through the arduous process provided by the Constitution itself, I firmly believe that we the people have a duty to treat such action as an assault on our democracy and freedom. I make this distinction because those who come to this broadcast waving the MAGA flag are not merely arguing for policy changes. They are advocating against our democracy. They may not realize it. They may not be enlightened citizens. They may not understand the difference between a democracy and an autocracy. They may be unwittingly advocating for an autocracy, an oligarchy, or even a dictatorship. The problem is their ignorance is the want-to-be dictator's weapon. By the time they wake up and realize what is happening, it may be too late. For those reasons, in this podcast, that is how their opinions will be addressed. And that is why I am so strongly opposed to the MAGA mindset. My goals for this podcast are numerous. I hope to display a variety of different viewpoints from both extremes and all in between. I think it will provide a framework and a perspective from which to view the scope of the problems we face. The primary focus of this podcast is to send up a flare, to sound an alarm, to shock people into listening. And what is the message? The message is we must begin now to address the root cause of our problem. We must develop a plan to create an enlightened citizenry. That will necessarily begin with identifying and developing an appreciation for the basic tenets of our democracy, and fully incorporating that and its full, rich history into our public education system and stressing the importance of the governance function and how it interacts with the political function. In furtherance of that goal, this podcast will explore the basic functions of government, perhaps by envisioning the needs of original settlers moving west as they address their simple community needs. We will explore the essential tenets of a democracy and why they are essential, the history of successful and unsuccessful democracies, the needs of citizens to understand other forms of governance and how they compare and contrast to democracies, the diversity of citizenship and its rich history and contribution to our nation. And we will discuss a host of other issues, such as controlling myths and disinformation, minority rule, presidential powers, gerrymandering, militarization of police, criminal justice, separation of church and state, and how to create an enlightened citizenry. The syllabus for this podcast can be as rich and exciting as we want to make it, but the focus should remain constant. We must expand our fight to protect and preserve our democracy. Politics, as usual, will not suffice. We must do more. This is our chance to make a lasting contribution. I have put the wheel at the top of the hill and will give it a shove. It is up to our community to help that wheel roll down the hill, gain momentum, strength, numbers, and power. I hope to have spirited interviews with a wide variety of guests, some ordinary people and some experts in various fields of study. Your comments are welcome. I think the show will be lively, entertaining, and enlightening, and I hope it will shine a light on how to fix America.